I was doing charity work in high school, just outside of a smaller mountain city in Guatemala, Jalapa. We took one afternoon off to head into the city and check out the markets and whatnot. Riding around the city in the bed of pickup trucks, about 15 of us. Extremely common there. We noticed that there wasn't much activity and a lot of the shops were closed. A local who recognized our organization started yelling when we drove by and flagged us down. So we stopped. He was in the middle of setting up a roadblock and basically told us to get the duck out of the city as fast as possible. Reason being, there was a big protest riot planned for that day against Canadian mining operations taking advantage of the surrounding regions. This is a small, almost third world, militaristic Central American country. Every single one of us was Canadian. We could have very easily become the perfect bargaining tool for these rebel groups. Needless to say, we got out of there as quick as humanly possible. Front stage for Lamb of God, I think maybe 2012ish. Suddenly people started leaving before the next song. What I didn't realize at the time was I was in the middle of a world record attempt at the largest wall of death at a festival. I haven't noped any harder than that, I don't think. I was at this open air nightclub in Montezuma, Costa Rica. The group I was traveling with went to bed, so I was at the bar by myself, drinking Imperial and taking in the scene. I was really drunk. The bar was packed and loud and hot and humid. The crowd consisted of young local guys with their girlfriends, stray dogs walking around the dance floor, and a group of high school girls, American or Canadian, with two older male chaperones, in their mid-30s early 40s. The high school girls were all dancing with the two teachers and were taking turns making out with them in a strange and systematic manner, almost like they were brainwashed. The two teachers were having the time of their lives, glancing at each other with huge grins on their faces between makeout sessions with the underage girls. I'm totally engrossed in their group dynamic when suddenly a military truck full of police officers with assault rifles pulls up to the bar and swarms in. All the young Costa Ricans take off running in all directions. The bar had no walls, so it emptied pretty fast. The high school's girls and their teachers ran away too. The cops sprint out of the bar, following the Costa Rican guys into the darkness. I remained glued to my bar stool, beer in hand, mouth agape, brow furrowed. By the time I realized I better get the duck out of here, it was already over. I sat there alone, just me, my beer, and a couple stray dogs. I was at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado for a NO show. I left the concert early to grab something out of my car. On the way, I passed a suspicious looking individual, who moments later fired off a shotgun into the air. I sprinted all the way to my car, and it turns out this maniac was trying to kill one of the openers, Schoolboy Q. Nobody was hurt, and it barely even made the news, but a lot of people could have died if he made it inside the concert. I was driving back to school after Thanksgiving break in the rain about 8 years ago, and as I pass by an exit I see a pickup coming down the entrance ramp next to me really fast, like recklessly fast. I think to myself I better get ahead of this guy so I don't have to deal with merging with him, so I put my foot on the gas. About 10 seconds later I look in my rear view mirror to see the pickup about 100 feet behind me spinning across all 4 lanes. Then a semi which was trying to swerve to avoid him collides and smashes him straight into the barrier as it turns fully sideways across the highway. Huge bang sound as the pickup basically disintegrated. I had to pull over at the next rest stop just to calm down. Raider 9 a preseason game. I got free tickets so I brought my girlfriend with me since she had never been to a football game. Game was at Candlestick Park, which is in the ghetto in SF. Game was rowdy from the start with fights breaking out all over the stadium. I made a point to not drink because I wanted to have my wits about me the whole time. It got so crazy that we left early, and as we were leaving, a bunch of cops and ambulances were headed towards the stadium. We got out of the city and my bros started texting me asking if I was okay cause there were shootings. Never felt so uncomfortable at a sporting event in my life. My friends and I were in an In-N-Out Burger in LA about 10 years ago. We saw one guy go into the restroom, closely followed by about 8 more. Suddenly there was an incredible ruckus from the bathroom, bodies slamming into the walls repeatedly. Sounds like sinks being torn off the walls. but no speaking or yelling whatsoever. Luckily, there was a security guard in the restaurant. He listened for a moment, stood up, and then jogged to his car and drove away. Needless to say, he didn't stick around to see what was going on in there, but it couldn't have been good. I was on a motorcycle trip through Mexico in 2011-12, right when all the super violent stuff was going down. We had stopped around noon in a small town, Playa Azul, in Michoacan, home of the most violent cartel at the time, La Familia, to rest and get a little cash. The only ATM was just outside the police building, which itself was surrounded by open fields. In the span of literally 1 minute, everyone in the town disappeared. It was the most eerie thing ever. Bustling small town 1 minute, ghost town the next. A couple minutes after that, a bunch of helicopters appeared and commandos started to rappel out. We didn't want to be there when the bullets started to fly, so we got on our bikes and took off. Only problem was that the army had, at the same time, set up roadblocks on the 3 main roads. Luckily, they saw we were terrified gringos and immediately waved us through. We were the only people they let through. From what I saw, obviously they were trying to capture some big drug lord, but I never did find out the whole story. I have a pretty photo that I took really quickly that I can add when I get home. Edit. Found some itty photos. Sorry for the quality. Took them super fast at the time and wasn't planning to post them on Reddit years later. I was at a house party with a few friends, where pretty much everyone from our college year was invited. One guy, who was affectionately called One Drink Davey, had probably downed about 2 pints of Stella within the hour, and I personally knew he was just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Nevertheless, we all sat down to play Ring of Fire. That's when I saw it. His hand raised to his mouth and his eyes closed. I bolted for the door. Just as I make it past the doorframe, I hear a familiar splash and everyone screaming. 15 minutes later, I thought I'd go back upstairs to assess the damage. Holy it's everywhere. Not just Davies. Apparently he'd started a chain with the sympathy pukers, and what I was seeing was about 5 people's worth of vomit all over poor Jane's mother's cream carpets. I've never been so glad to have been able to detect when someone's going to hurl. I was doing a semester abroad in London. At the time there were concerns about bombings on the underground trains. During our orientation, one of our guides mentioned that if you ever heard a voice on the underground PA system, ask for Inspector Sands. That was code to alert the underground staff that there was some kind of emergency without panicking the riders. One night, after class, I stopped at a restaurant. It was a McDonald's. Sue me, and the cashier forgot my order, causing my meal to be delayed. Once I got my food and finished eating, I headed to the nearest tube station to board a train home, and heard, playing on repeat, "Will Inspector Sands report to the office?" or something similar. I then noticed that a horde of police cars was converging on the area. I turned right the duck around and took a bus home. Turns out it wasn't a bombing. Someone had pushed someone else onto the tracks in front of a train. Still, I thought for half a second that a ratty McDonald's cashier might have saved me from getting blown up. This happened about 12-13 years ago. I was about 10 years old at the time. Me and my father were sitting in our car having food at a food truck. While we were sitting there, some drunk men came and parked right in front of us, blocking our way. After some time the car behind us honked so they could leave. My dad honked at the car in front of us, but they just waved at us saying they're not moving. My dad went out and told this to the car behind us. Those were 2 young men as well. They went and asked him to move. Drunk men again gave some vulgar sign and told them to duck off. This dude straight up punched the window, breaking it. Drunk men came out to fight, while my dad just picked me up and walked away from the scene. We were watching from a distance when the dude who was behind us took his gun out and shot the drunk car guy in the head point blank. Then they calmly walked back to their car, and since everyone ran away, backed up their car and went their way. I have a few more, but this was on top of my mind. I'll give you one of my dad. He was a nuclear engineer. Now you know this story is headed in a bad direction. For Ontario Hydro, he had made several complaints that the Pickering nuclear power plant was not updating their inspections of the heavy water containment. Nothing was done. My father knew there was going to be a high pressure test scheduled for August. You know what he does? He scheduled his 3-week summer vacation to begin at the end of July. On the 2nd of August 1992, Pickering had a heavy water leak. So I'm watching the evening news. The president of Ontario Hydro is giving a press conference. Everything is fine. Then as soon as that press conference is over, my phone rings. It's the president of Ontario Hydro asking where my dad is. They got to figure out how to clean up this mess. I said he's camping way up in the Cape Breton Highlands of Nova Scotia. So he asks, did my dad bring his cell phone with him? And I'm looking at the cell phone sitting right there on the kitchen counter. Obviously not. And even if he did bring it with him, there's no way the mountains of Nova Scotia had cell phone coverage in 1992. So he tells me to call all my relatives in Nova Scotia to track him down. Which I tried. No luck. Great big nuclear spill. Not his problem. And when my dad finally did turn up 2 weeks later, he was all, not my circus. Not my problem. Like he knew exactly what was going to happen, and the people who ignored it can deal with it themselves. I was visiting Belgium with my dad a couple of years back. I love arcades and found one in Ousend where we were staying. I was spending a couple of hours of my free time in there while my dad was round the corner in a sports bar watching football. I was playing a game of pinball when I noticed this guy who was just hanging around near me, not really doing anything, just staring in another direction towards some games. I finished my game and started to leave. He followed me. I noticed this and stopped and pretended to browse some of the prizes you can win with tickets. He stopped as well and pretended to look around. At this point I swiftly walked straight out the arcade. He followed me, and as soon as we were on the street, a guy leaning against the wall joined up with him and followed me about 10 feet back. These two were the worst muggers ever, and I picked up on it straight away. They were obviously thinking I was going to walk home, if I was local and even lived there, and wait until we got out of the city center to try something. I went round the bend at the end of the road and straight into the sports bar where my dad was. They didn't follow me in and just kept walking past. I breathed a sigh of relief and enjoyed the rest of my evening. Edit. Judging by the PMs I'm getting, Belgium has some sort of pedophile problem I'm not aware of. Yeah, okay guys, it's a joke from in Bruges. Thanks. Not me, but a friend of mine. I was with a guy who knew some pretty hardcore parties, so I went with him. We walked in and the first thing I notice in the house is a pile of sugar on the table and a pistol on the bar. My friend told me we need to GTFO. We passed 3 police cruisers headed to the party. On the way out, they busted the place right after we left. Growing up, whenever my brother was arguing with my mom and he started his next point with "you know what, mom," I always knew that was the time to get out of the room. It was going to get ugly. My uncle and stepfather were drinking late at night, watching TV while me and a few others were just chilling in the living room. I was 15, I think. There was some shouting outside on our street. We all went out on the porch to gawk and saw our neighbor, old man, being dragged around on the asphalt by some young guy. My uncle with his drunken bravado strutted into the middle of it and he and the young man started to push each other. Then my uncle pulled out a switchblade and the guy ran into the old man's house. That's when I decided to go back inside and watch from a window with the phone in my hand. Sure enough, the dude came back out with a butcher knife. The two of them started to struggle. My stepfather jumped in to break it up, and he ended up getting stabbed in the back by the young dude. I called the police and we ended up in the hospital all night waiting to see if my stepfather would live. He did, with a punctured lung and a lot of recovery time. In 2007 I was walking towards Grand Central Station in Nick with headphones in when suddenly I see a couple of people running towards me and away from Grand Central. At first I don't think twice about it, but then more and more people are running down the sidewalks, in the streets, and they look scared. I take my headphones off and ask someone what's going on. They tell me there's been an explosion at Grand Central. I look up and see the smoke. My chest tightens and I turn and I start running. I just want to get as far away as possible. Finally, from a safe distance I get a cab and head uptown away from the explosion. It turned out to be a steam pipe explosion. The fears from 9/11 were still running high at this time and everyone had automatically assumed the worst. Luckily it wasn't that bad, although I think one person may have died during the event. But it was scary to be there. Went home from college the summer before my senior year. Met an old crush of mine and she invited me to a party. I walked to the address and it was this horrible, broken down house in a bad part of town. Went inside and recognized most of the people there as old co-students from high school. Had a good time drinking and smoking with them. I was pretty straight lace in high school. I couldn't find my crush, so I went exploring the house. Found her a few other people shooting up heroin in one of the rooms. I'm not a fan of being around intravenous drugs, so I immediately left. I was only one house away before 3 cop cars started coming toward the house. I casually sat down on the other house's stoop and lit a cigarette. Watched people in the party get arrested until the cops were all looking away. Walked away into the night. Edit. Heroin. The drug. Not heroin. A female protagonist. Last summer at my company's annual picnic I was walking to the bathroom and noticed this older guy behind me. I wasn't really concerned. Just figured he was headed there too. When I saw a group of co-workers standing and chatting on the way I stopped to talk to them. And noticed the guy had stopped too. About 10 feet behind me. When I started walking again I noticed he was on the move again. And started to get weirded out. When I got near the bathroom I juked outside the door and made my way back to my co-workers. Sure enough, he followed along and kept his 10-foot distance from the group. I spoke quietly to them and told them all to check out this guy who was following me as I made my way back to the larger group. Sure enough, even with 6 ladies watching him he followed me to the larger group where some of my male co-workers were. I went up to my buddy, Skip, and asked him if he would come with me to the bathroom to confront this guy, and he ran around the outside perimeter as I made my walk back with my faithful tail still on the move. Skip had already gone into the bathroom before I got there, so when I finally made it in and he followed I just turned around and asked the ducker if he wanted to die today. He just silently turned around and left. The craziest thing about this is that I'm not a small guy, albeit not a giant like Skip, so I have no idea what he thought was going to happen or what he would have done to me in the bathroom if he got me alone. TLDR. Managed to avoid unwanted man 6 being murdered by paying attention to a dude following me. Bonus happy ending. My team at work won softball, volleyball, and tug of war. Was leaving a bush party with a friend. To do this we had to climb a really steep hill. Not too tough because there were little trees growing out of it to grasp. About halfway up we see flashlights and someone yelled cops. My friend and I turned around and went down. I saw 2 kids rolling down the hill hitting trees. By the time we got to the bottom I decided I should get the duck out of there, but will not. Gave my friend a beer and he ran off. I lay down with my beer in some long grass and didn't move. They never found me and I heard them laughing saying things like haha, this it is what I signed up for. Eventually I fell asleep and I woke up hours later and walked home.